today's guest is Mike Brewer. He's the COO at RADCO. Mike, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I truly appreciate it.
Yeah, so Adrian connected us, and I've seen all your social media stuff online. Have you been at social media a lot?
Yeah, so the origin story is that back when MySpace was a thing, if you can recall back that far, yeah, I started writing a blog. It was called Mike Brewer on Stuff and Things, and my very first blog post was about a solar powered trash compacting machine that you sat on a street. and Yeah, from that moment on, so that was a blog, and back then people didn't even know what a blog was. They thought it was like you were clearing your throat and that was the leftover product in your mouth. That was like what a blog was. But so started writing the blog in 2005, 2006, just
Wow.
personally. And then I started writing a blog for the properties that we were managing at the time at Equity Residential. And we started to see that that blog content was actually helping us boost our kind of page one results on Google. And so the rest was history. I started doing tons of blogs. And then that segued to video at some point, like 2005, 2006. I saw video was going to be a huge thing. So I started doing the daily blog and I have been doing that ever since. So
Wow, that's awesome because it's not common for someone in your position, like an operating position, to also be active. So I was very, very curious when it started.
yeah, it was a very long time ago. And every time a new, let's call it a distribution system like Twitter or Facebook, or I saw those more as distribution systems than really like social networks. They were like just places to put content and advertise for free most of the time. Uh, so every time something would come along, we would become a practitioner of it. I say we, it was me doing all of it, but but I like to say we, like a huge team. It's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. No, I love that. I mean, uh, you know, do you do like you've been in property management for a long time? Like, did you do some side things? Because not because you're so curious on the technology side all the time. Were you sort of doing side things or something?
Yeah, so for my entire life, I won't bore you with all of these things, but when I was in ninth or 10th grade, I got the idea that I wanted to start a car stereo shop. So I started selling like woofers and tweeters and head units to my friends at school. And then that segued into a landscaping business. So I started like cutting grass and that kind of thing. I actually built that into a pretty big business. And then I opened a baseball card shop when I was in college. We never got into comics. It was mostly just baseball cards and that kind of stuff. So I think my entire life I've always had some sort of side hustle going on. So I'm going to school, but I'm like doing this thing. And then I get into the multifamily space but I'm writing a blog and doing all that kind of stuff also. And yeah, I don't like to sit still, I guess that's my problem.
So, um, you have all these interests. I saw you commenting on OpenAI and all these things. How's that translating to your day to day? Because you're an executive. It's a fairly established organization. How does your interest there translate to what you do?
Yeah, so I think if any of that technology that I've become a personal practitioner of, I think that it segues quite nicely into our business because sometimes you don't want to necessarily introduce a piece of technology or a platform or something of that nature into an ecosystem that's well established, to use your words, without cutting your teeth on it a little bit. And so
Mm,
I think where it's been useful is that because I have such a curiosity about it, I go out and really practice using the craft by doing a lot of participation, a lot of trying to break the system, and uh, and then that way, when we do try to bring those things into our organization, we at least have a working understanding of the way it might help us.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's worked quite nicely for us most of the time. I'm sure there have been some duds along the way, and I've compartmentalized them back to.
Well, I think that's what you do. You go in and you're the uh, you're the test case, and if it doesn't work, you don't tell people about it. If it works, then you probably have some early adopters that are curious about what you're doing, and then they permeate through your organization.
I think that's a fair statement. Yes.
Okay, so tell me how your business works. Like, you have an investment side, you have a property management side. How does that all kind of fit together?
Yeah, it's a great question. So our organization is called the RADCO companies, and then it's bifurcated into, to your point, a an investment shop, and then also on the other side is an operating company. So we buy and sell primarily multifamily assets. So A, B, and C class assets, some value add, some kind of just stabilized core assets, and then we buy class A luxury properties. That's what we've been buying as of late. And so we buy them on the investment side of our house, and then we flip them over to the operating side of our house, and then we have a whole team that runs the day-to-day business of multifamily apartment communities. We also have a construction division that's under the RADCO residential side, which is the operating arm, that does our value add piece. So we do unit renovations or heavier capex projects, roof replacements, window replacements, rehabbing or renovating common area spaces like playgrounds, dog parks, clubhouses, etc. We have a team that does that. And we don't do all of that work. We just kind of do the general contracting piece and hiring vendors to come in and actually do that kind of work. Uh,
Mm.
and then and then in the last 12 months plus minus, we are actually started buying hotels. We don't manage hotels. We just buy the hotels and hold them as investments. And then there's a whole world out there that does hotel management, which we have no desire to get into.
Okay, so all your activity seems to be driven by the investment side. Is that correct?
Yes, I think so. Our founder and CEO Norman Radout is he is an entrepreneur through and through, and so the investment side of our shop has just been in his DNA since starting the company like 28 years ago, plus minus.
Yeah.
His very first project was renovating the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Atlanta, and from that moment on, he just had the real estate bug, and definitely is driven by making the investments, beautifying the properties, making them safe and sound, and creating incredible experiences for the consumer, for the residents that live there, or the people that come in and out of the buildings that we own. And then at some point, running them to plan and then exiting those, obviously on behalf of our investor base. But yeah, that really is what drives our business is the investment side.
So it seems like there's twofold on the investment side. A is attracting investments and then finding the qualified properties and putting those together. Is that kind of your core competencies of your organization?
I would say that is 100% true. I will say that we've been in large part friends and family investment shops. So most of those funds that are raised are from literally dentists and doctors and just individuals like yourself or myself. And with a few kind of bigger investments by bigger shops or more organized investment shops, we haven't ventured into the raising a fund world yet. Uh, but yeah, most of that has been built kind of friends and family style.
Yeah. And then the social media piece, how does that interact? Is it just the opportunity flow? Because it doesn't seem like you really open up the investment side. You're very careful with that. So is that just more the property acquisition side?
Yeah, so I think for the longest time there were rules against selling and using social media to sort of try to raise funds from people because it's a regulated business. You have to be a accredited investor. I think that loosened up several years ago, but I think there was a little bit of like a hesitation on our part to actually go out and try to raise funds those ways. Uh, However, we already had a very large investor base, so we didn't really have to do that. I think where social media has really made an impact for our organization is more on the human side, attracting people to the organization that want to work in this. What doesn't, I mean, it looks very high energy and very fun and those sorts of things out on social media, and that's because it is. And so been really helpful to us and useful to us to tell that story by way of social media to attract talent to the organization.
Got it. So in terms of, you piloting the next series of technologies, what has your interest?
Oh wow, this is a good
Did
question.
I open something?
Oh wow, I really, yeah, I had to be careful with this because it's I tended to think very quixotically, and I think this is not a pat me on the back sort of thing, but sometimes I'm dreaming ahead of the technology's capabilities, you know? And so I do think there is a day where certainly OpenAI, and I know we're in the very early innings, and making application of OpenAI could be very dangerous just as much as it can be useful. But I do think there's a day that is coming that is really soon. Let's say it's right around the bend that you could actually create business system architecture using an OpenAI platform such that you could create platforms that actually govern your business. Like a bot might be a good example. So the day when OpenAI actually opens up data sets where that I can take my internal private data and I can commingle it or merge it with OpenAI data that is structured certainly, that is scrubbed certainly. When I can put those two things together, I think that I can actually offer up sort of a bot-like experience that rivals hiring a third party to do that. Even to the extent of writing the code at the bot, right? You could
Are
OpenAI
you speaking of like governance, or what are you talking about?
like customer and consumer interaction or leasing and sales or marketing and branding and internal learning and development and teaching and training, right? If I have an AI co-pilot right here, if I run up against something like right now, you're interviewing me, you ask me a question, I don't know the answer to it. Maybe I tell the I was just asked this question. Well, oh yeah, it's a good answer. Hey, you know,
Yeah, I can't make this interview. Could you please sub in?
yeah, you're like, oh, I'm stumped. You take over. but 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 I think in the learning and development, like real time, if I'm trying to fix something and or I'm trying to interact with the consumer, if I had an AI co-pilot, if I get stumped, I don't want the consumer to have a bad experience. So I could actually have these AI assistants that are predicting in some ways what you're trying to get at and then articulating it to me in a way that I understand and then me re-articulating that to you and or the bot might say it back to you, who knows, but I think the battle of the future is going to be the battle of the imagination and the creatives, right? and
Mm,
and you've got in my head you need to have people who are very imaginative, very creative, and understand how to tie business outcomes to a process. And those people are going to create the architectures and business models in the future. And that future, by the way, is not too far away.
mm. Which type of organizations are people are I don't know, people you look to for inspiration?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this might be I don't know if it's a weird answer or not, but Kroger, the grocery store, Kroger,
Really?
is like leaps and bounds ahead of people in these respects. They're using huge data sets and architecture and blending models together for supply, right, and supply chain type stuff, and inventory management, and even labor distribution. And so Kroger, somewhere in the world, someone sets and they set the temperature of every single Kroger store across the country in one command center, right? And they don't even touch it. It's like it's all governed by the sensors and the ambient temperatures in the buildings. And so they're so far advanced. You wouldn't think about a grocery store in that way, but I look to them. Amazon certainly. I'm very fascinated by the idea that you can click a button, but there's probably like 2 million things that happen behind that click that that are disappeared from the consumer experience. But I look to them for inspiration. Certainly the Apples and the Googles of the world. They're working on interesting stuff all of the time.
Yeah.
Um, but
What about like within property management and construction? What are things that've caught your attention?
I think there's a company, UDR is the name of the organization. I think I was listening to their earnings call a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was last week, and I was surprised to learn that they are on the path this year to have 40% of their apartment communities run humanless. So no one on the property, right? Yet residents live there, like hundreds of people live in these buildings. There's no one there, but all the stuff that is necessary, like move-ins, move-outs, elevators not working, my toilet is plugged, all that stuff happens. It still happens. They still get like high marks in customer service um, without a human being there,
Yeah,
right?
walk me through the tenant experience. Like what are some of the things that they were showcasing?
So so, uh, I think a lot of this was accelerated by the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So self-tour, right? So if I have smart home technology and a lock on my door, but I'm a consumer and I wanna go look at an apartment, because it's all smart technology, I can give you a code, you can enter the building. I can show you a path, like maybe it's a human assisted, but I'm not at the property, but we're doing a little FaceTime thing, right? I can guide you through the building to the apartment that you're gonna look at. You've got a code, you walk in, you tour yourself. Um, and then you can, on the heels of that, you receive an email that has a link that gets you an online application that you can fill in. I take a picture of your face to verify who you are. So there's some check points along the way that verify your identification, verify your income, and things we do on the front side of a lease. Do all that, you hit submit, we qualify you, then we send you a lease contract, which is pretty much filled in. You can sign that electronically. You can move into the building. I give you a code to your front door, and no human is involved in that, right? That's probably the easiest example for what they're showcasing. And there are other companies, but they just happen to be the one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah. Now, you started out, it looks like on the district manager side, and you kind of moved up, vice president and now COO. What sort of things have you learned in that process? Because I mean, I think larger responsibility, larger teams. What are some of the skill sets that you learned that have helped you along the way?
Oh wow, I've learned a lot. I make literally thousands of mistakes every year. I'm kind
Same.
of the I I learned early on in my career that it's kind of, I don't know who coined this term, but fail forward fast, right? And look at every failure as not a failure, but uh, a learning opportunity. And I don't have it with me, but I have a journal. I've been journaling for like 25 years. At the end of every day, I ask myself the question, what did I learn today, right? And I
Mm.
literally pencil out the question, and I pencil out the answer to that question. So every year I'm collecting like 365 things. Now I make a lot more mistakes in this, but 365 things that I didn't do well, right? So I learned, and so I guess that in and of itself is just treat failure like a lesson, embrace it for education, not for, oh gosh, woe is me, right? It's like a way to get better with like a super fast feedback loop, right?
Yeah. So you're asking yourself that question every day. I mean, what are some of your most memorable learnings?
Oh, wow. So the one that comes to mind always when people ask me this question is, um, so one time I had a regional manager that was coming to visit my property, and I sat down with my team and I created a list of like 50 things that we needed to accomplish before she got there, which was like 72 hours later. Maybe it was next week, but I'm for exaggeration's sake, it was not very long. And assigned people all these projects, and I'm like, go get it done, and long story short, we put way too much on that list. People were not as thrilled about it as I was. My property manager and my regional manager regional and district manager show up to tour the property. It's a disaster. It's terrible. I learned a lot. The district manager writes me a letter after the visit and says, all the good intentions in the world are worth nothing unless followed through with, right? So I that is probably the biggest lesson I ever learned because I was embarrassed, my dignity was impacted, all of those things, right? But the way she wrote that letter was with such grace. So I learned follow through, don't say it unless you can do it. But I also learned how to be graceful when counseling someone because the way she handled me was so great. And I've taken that lesson away too. So you got to treat people with grace, especially when they're down.
Yeah, for sure. So, writing down your learnings every day is not something I hear from everyone. Are there other things or interesting practices that other people point out that's unique to you or that's worked over the years?
So I'm very disciplined, and a lot of times people rail against discipline, but I think discipline really allows you to be freer in your life if you can put certain routines in place. So people have walked away sometimes in employed things in their own life as as using inspiration from me sometimes. That sounds weird to say. I don't like the way that sounds, but like I exercise is really big to me. Eating right is really big to me. I journal every day. I talk about that all the time. I read uh, probably 50 to 65 books every year,
How do
like
you choose those books?
mostly by way of recommendation by people that I trust that have read the book and actually taken something away from it. I'm not buying the Amazon recommends this to you list.
Well, what do you mean? You don't listen to bots?
No, not in that case. I'm sure I do in lots of other cases, but no, I will only buy a book if somebody that I truly have a great deal of respect for recommends it to me. And that
Sure.
could be somebody I don't know necessarily. Like Tim Ferriss is somebody I follow on. I listen to his podcast almost religiously, and if he recommends a book, uh, and I'll go and read about it on based on his recommendation, and I'll buy those a lot of times. But it's
So
usually
it
people.
it sounds like, you have a sort of a very, sort of planned out routine,
Yeah,
because if you're reading one book a week, you're running a larger organization, you're journaling, you're doing all these things. I assume you travel
yeah.
consistently.
From time,
Then
yeah,
yeah, so which probably means you're stacking some of these things together, right?
yeah. That's very fair. I also get up at 4:30 every morning, so
Mm.
from 4:30 to 8:30, I call it prime time. I literally
Mhm.
write it right here, prime time.
Love it. What
So
what happens in prime time?
so that's I'll try. So I wake up, I drink 32 ounces of water, I run 3 to 5 miles. I do the 10 pages of reading. I do meditation. I read my Bible. I journal. Uh, I write 4 blog posts. I'm sorry, I'm writing a book. I write 4 of the entries for the book, and then I write 2 blog posts. Uh,
Wow.
and then I drink a really nutritious shake before I take a shower and come to work.
2 blog posts, reading a book, a full extra so wow, that's amazing, and how long you been doing that for? It sounds like a consistent routine.
Yeah, so the routine actually it's very based on goals that I have. So writing a book this year was one of my goals.
Oh.
So I'm actually done with the book as of yesterday. So that's going to come off the list, but I'll insert something else into that slot, if you will. But yeah, the routine has been going on for probably the better part of 7 or 8 years now, but probably longer than that with a sort of condensed version of it. The older I get, it seems like that routine gets more and more packed on the front side during the morning.
Prime time becomes the whole day, right?
I was like, what is this? Just like our prime time is now like 3 hours? That's weird.
Where's Mike? Yeah. He's up at 3.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, oh, I gotta get that. I gotta get that. I gotta stop setting such ambitious goals, I think is my problem.
Give me a summary of your book. I mean, obviously, when you start a book, there's a premise. So what got you really excited?
The thing so the book is actually one of those daily readers. So you open it up to January. Well, what is today? February 17th. You would open this book to that date and you would read something about that. So because I've read so many books over the last like 25 years, I I keep these I don't have any handy, but I keep 3 by 5 index cards with me all the time in a black Sharpie. So every time I read a book, if something really strikes me, I write that on a 3 by 5, and I have this big box at home that's just full of 3 by 5 index cards. And so I thought, and I read Ryan Holiday's like Daily Stoic book, and I thought, I want to do that. I want to have my own book, and I have all these cards that I've collected for what reason I don't know. Oh, it's probably to write a book. So I just pulled all those cards out and just started writing these daily entries from that. So that's the book.
That's great. So I can always already visualize the social media campaign. You publish those cards.
Yes, yes, and I'll like
Yes,
give
with
them
the link
away.
to your, free 4 chapters.
Yeah, yeah,
There you go.
exactly.
You got content for years.
Sign up and buy 20 books, and I'll give you like 10 of these cards, and I'll autograph them.
There you go. Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you want to cover?
Um, no, this has been fun. It's interesting. I usually sit on the other side of these conversations. I have my own podcast. I guess that's the other thing I do. I have a podcast. And being on this side is like foreign territory for me. So I hope it's valuable to your to your audience.